Welcome, everyone. We're excited to have with us today Ann Tracy from Colgate Palmolive. Ann is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Colgate Palmolive. We're going to be having a conversation about sustainability to learn a little bit more about the topic and more about the people in sustainability and specifically what's going on in Colgate Palmolive. Ann, welcome. Thank you very much for being here today.
I'm pleased to be here and to share with everyone our story. Thank you.
Okay, we'll start with our toughest question, I think. When we talk about sustainability, it's overarching and it's large and can be overwhelming for some. So to you, what is the definition of business sustainability?
Yeah, that is a really big question. Well, I think it could sort of in detail take on a different shape for different companies, different industries. But for us, if you think about it at a high level, it's really how we bring our business purpose to life. And it's about, and how do we do that is we need to focus on what is material for our company, where can we drive the biggest impact in terms of, social impact, environmental impact, as well as, how do we make our products and the way people use our products more sustainable. So those are kind of the big spaces. And we believe that, that's a barrier to entry for business going forward on a bad day. On a good day, if we do that right, it'll also help us gain more loyal users of our products. So that's more or less how, so it's really bringing our purpose to life in an authentic way.
Wonderful. And we'll build on that in just a minute. You talked about the purpose and you're at Colgate Palmolive. A lot of us know Colgate from the toothpaste. But can you tell us a little bit more about Colgate Palmolive as a company overall?
Yeah. So for people who don't know our company that well, we have 4 core categories. So hopefully you brush your teeth with Colgate. So our biggest category is oral care. We also have personal care and home care, both which have brands which are more regional around the world. So if you're in the US, you might know Soft Soap, which is an important personal care brand for us, in body wash and liquid hand soap. We make Irish Spring. In Europe, it's Sanex. And home care also has very regional brands, fabric softeners and some cleaners. And then we own Hill's Pet Nutrition, which is Science Diet and Science Plan in Europe. So those are our 4 core categories. We have quite a number of big brands across those categories that I just mentioned. And we're organized divisionally by region. So we have North America, Latin America, Europe, Asia, and so forth, 6 divisions. And then we have a revenue of a little over between $15 and $16 billion. So we're not as big as some of the bigger companies out there, but I think it's a nice size to manage our purpose.
So wonderful. I mean, this is a perfect transition as you talked about the purpose and the company. The title of Chief Sustainability Officer, as you define sustainability, can be wide ranging. So what do you specifically do as a Chief Sustainability Officer?
So my role is, really to help the company set the strategy for the future around sustainability and social impact, and really help us figure out how to embed that into our business growth strategy. And I, as a Chief Sustainability Officer, I don't have a large team, but I work with many people across the company. I kind of think of myself as a convener and an influencer, if you will. So I have to, on any given week, I'm on the phone a couple days a week with Asia or with Europe. And I'm talking to them about how we bring our strategy to life through their business, what's relevant to their business on the ground. So we're really aiming to bring our strategy to life in a way that helps us to grow the business. And that is what I see my main role as.
So you're the first CSO at Colgate Palmolive. Do you mind telling us a little bit about your journey and kind of how you ended up here?
Yeah, let me tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm actually an engineer by training. I graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering, actually a master's. I then went to work in the CPG space, consumer product goods, consumer packaged goods, went to work for Colgate. That was 30 years ago. So I've been at Colgate a long time. This is my 30th year. And I grew up actually in the supply chain, really started out in manufacturing, working shift jobs in the plants, to running a plant, to running a region, to participating on divisional teams, and moving over to the more commercial side of the business. And then about 3 years ago, I formally came back to the headquarters, which for us is in New York, and started working on the global supply chain strategy and as well heading up global sustainability for Colgate. And this was at the beginning of 2018. And what we started to do then was frame our future strategy for 2025. At Colgate, we tend to think of our strategies in 5-year increments. 2020 was fast approaching. So we were beginning to frame out and map our future strategies. So I helped to shape both the supply chain strategy as well as the sustainability strategy. And, you know, I then went to my boss and said, there's a lot of work here to do to get this sustainability strategy where it needs to be, where it needs to go, and how we're going to bring it to life to grow the business. So I then found myself in the position of Chief Sustainability Officer. So now I focus on sustainability, and I have some other peers working on the supply chain side. But I still work very closely with my supply chain friends because I'm heavily dependent on them to get a lot of this work done.
Perfect. I really like you use the word influencer, where you're an influencer within the organization and try to get people to move one way or the other. How do you first get that, let's call it power or influence, so people start listening? And then, you know, we'll start off with that. How do you kind of gather that influence within an organization?
Well, I guess I'd start by saying one of the things I love most about this job right now is the fact that, you know, having been at a company as long as I have, I know a lot of the people. So we are a very people-centric organization, and we heavily rely on the networks we build. But that's not unique to Colgate. Other companies are like that. But I think, you know, first, we built the strategy. We didn't do that in a vacuum. It was important to us to understand perspectives from all over the company, across all the functions at different levels. So we did a lot of groundwork before we began to construct the strategy to understand perspectives. We even ran a global employee survey and had responses from over 104 countries. We put it in different languages. So we really did a lot of outreach to hear from all stakeholders. And then when we built the strategy, again, we engaged people. I think we probably had over 100 people, subject matter experts, as I call them, to help shape the pieces of our strategy. You know, again, there's a social element. We have 3 ambition spaces: driving social impact, helping millions of homes, and preserving our environment. So, you know, under the social element, it was around our community work, our philanthropy work, mentorship, volunteerism, our own employees, the health and well-being, which has actually been absolutely critical in the last year, of course. Not just, you know, physical, but also mental and financial. And it's about a huge focus on strengthening our DE&I program. We have one in place, but we're doubling down on that space right now. And then under helping millions of homes, it's really around designing more sustainable products and helping communicate how to use those products, how to change behaviors to the people who buy them. So that's the marketing aspect. So that helping millions of homes ambition is really engaging our R&D folks and our marketing folks. And then under preserving our environment is really where we have rich engagement with our supply chain. It's around continuing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, water, energy, waste to landfill, and responsible sourcing. And probably one of our biggest areas of focus right now is around reducing, or we call it eliminating plastic waste. So we engage a lot of functions, a lot of subject matter experts to build the strategy, and now to socialize the strategy. So, okay, so now everybody's aware of it. What do we do next? We have to bring it to life in each of the business units. And to do that, we're trying to meet them where they're at. We're trying to meet them where they are, meaning not every place in the world is at the same kind of maturity or focus level when it comes to sustainable topics. So Europe, as you guys may know, I mean, they've been living and breathing this stuff for quite a number of years. They're about to kind of figure out how they're going to execute the new EU Green Deal. Arguably kind of the most mature in the world in terms of this space. US not far behind. In Asia, they're very much concerned about the plastic issue because that's where a lot of the plastic waste is. Yet they don't have as much infrastructure. So each part of the world has different levels of maturity, different levels of infrastructure, have different priorities. So what we're trying to do is we have this corporate strategy, but we're not saying, here, go execute it. We're saying, this is the framework. How do we adapt it to what's relevant to your business, where you are? And I think that's one of the best ways to gain the buy-in and the ownership on the ground, and thereby influence success, I guess you could say.
Perfect. Just I guess a follow up on that. As you empower people to you have the framework that you've put in place with the stakeholders, but different regions or different business groups might within the company might think of putting in place sustainability a little bit different, or they might set their same targets. How do you make sure that everybody kind of moves along as this train is moving?
Yeah, I mean, it takes a really heavy effort on the communication side. So one of my strongest partners and allies is our corporate communications team internally. They help us to organize in a way, and what's been great is today you can really share quite broadly with digital tools like we're doing today. I don't know how big the audience is today, but we're reaching a lot of people, right? And we do the same with our own employees. There's multiple ways we can extend the reach, but it's just a lot of communication internally. The other thing we're leveraging, even with our own employees, is external social media, because they're following press releases, they're following LinkedIn. When we did that survey I mentioned earlier, and we did this 2 years ago, we asked them, how do you want to learn about what we're doing? How do you want to learn about progress? And most of them, there was it was funny, it was an inverse, where the way we were traditionally doing it through emails and our intranet site, which is only internal, they said, no, we want to read about it. We want to read about it in LinkedIn. We want to read about it on Instagram. We want to read about it in the press. So we've really increased our external communication, which of course has the added benefit of reaching people externally, and opens up kind of new opportunities.
So I guess building on that is, when you put the story out there, you're putting it external to satisfy the internal stakeholders. How do you make sure you maybe don't overcommit or don't overpromise as you're starting to roll out a strategy, right? If you talk about it internally, you can work out the kinks before it becomes public, because the customers, especially within CPG, the customer is such a big component of the strategy overall, are they not?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think it just comes down to a heavy alignment at all levels of the company, and consistent language. We had a call just earlier today with our corporate communications and legal team to make sure we're using this word instead of that word. It's very, we do run everything we do past the right internal, stakeholder owners, legal, and so forth. I mean, that's part of being a part of a big company. So, but we have a pretty rich governance structure in place, which is another topic of how we talked about communicating to all employees. That's good. But actually we have a pretty robust hierarchy of like engaging all the way up to our board, our company board, to our CEO, to his kind of leadership team, to what we call it a sustainability steering team that meets quarterly, which is a subset of senior leaders that help us make key decisions and align on targets, et cetera. And then we have ways to engage the subject matter experts that I mentioned that are kind of owning the strategy and the business units. And then we have everybody else. So there's actually a process to making sure everybody's aligned across what we're saying, what our targets are, and the goals we're setting for ourselves.
Perfect. I'll ask kind of a follow-up on this. Is part of the selling, sometimes people see value in understanding the impact of sustainability or seeing the business case or the value add. Are there some examples that you use to leverage selling it internally where maybe other parts of the world haven't caught on? Like you said, you kind of gave us an order where they see the value of sustainability. Can you give us some examples of?
Yeah, I think I can give you one really, really good example. And even then, it's not always easy, but you're hitting on a really key point, which is as we move forward and we try to shift, all our brands to build more purpose-driven brands. Sometimes that comes at a cost or the requirement to change people's behaviors, consumers' behaviors. So how do you really build the business case? And this is, I'm not sure I've seen anybody really crack that nut quite yet. But we do have some examples where we feel like we've made some good headway. And the best example I can give is that, I think I mentioned that one of the spaces that we're really heavily leaning into right now is plastic waste, eliminating plastic waste, because we're a consumer goods company and we everything we make uses plastic packaging pretty much. And we recognize that's a very visible issue out there and that people are looking at that and they're concerned about it. So we're on a journey to, we've set some pretty clear targets for 2025. First, we want all of our plastic packaging to be 100% recyclable, reusable, or compostable. And this is actually I'm not sure if the audience has heard of the global commitment put forth by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. That's a very big commitment that a number of companies have signed on to, but you have to commit to that. We have also committed, legal doesn't like me to use the word committed, but we set a target to increase the amount of recycled content, so reusing plastic to 25%. That's a challenging space because there's not enough out there. The demand outstrips the supply at this point in time and for the foreseeable future. But nevertheless, we're securing that. And then we've also set a target to reduce the overall amount of plastic, new plastic or virgin plastic that we use by 1/3, which actually is a pretty big deal because basically it means we won't add any new plastic to our portfolio going forward. So we have to increase the recycled content or we just have to reduce it. We have a hierarchy: reduce, reuse, recycle. And in that order, we have to try to tackle these issues. So we're the world's biggest oral care leader in the world with the brand Colgate. Colgate is actually, people don't know this, but it's the highest household penetrated consumer brand in the world, more than any other brand, even Coke. It's in 6 out of 10 households around the world. And household is a loose term in some cases. And we said, okay, we have to have the first recyclable toothpaste tube, because we lead in that space. That's our responsibility. So we set about designing the technology for that tube actually over 5 years ago. And it may sound simple, but it took several years to get it right. And when we set out to design that tube, we said it had to do 3 things. It had to be a monomaterial plastic that could go into an existing recycling stream. So we chose HDPE, which is the same plastic as a water bottle or a fabric softener bottle. And there's existing streams in most parts of the world for that. We said it had to be designed so that it kept the same level of flavor and fluoride efficaciousness that consumers enjoyed. You don't want to degrade your product. And it had to be squeezable like a tube. People would want to use it, right? So it took a while to get right. And along the way, we even engaged material recycling facilities to test it, to make sure when you drop it in that it goes in the HDPE streams. We did a lot of testing. And we engaged the Association of Plastic Recyclers, or APR, in the US, which basically they're the US leaders in kind of blessing what is recyclable, or sort of recognizing what is recyclable. So great, we designed it. The next step was, okay, now how do we roll this out? What's the rollout plan? We actually make most of our own tubes. We buy a few, but for the most part, we make our own tubes. We're the world's largest maker of toothpaste tubes, and we sell over 9 billion tubes of toothpaste a year. So we've invested a lot of money, or we are investing, to change all our equipment to make this new tube. First, you have to make the laminate, which is the flat layers of plastic, and then you form it into a tube. So we're converting our equipment. And initially, we expected productivity losses because it's a whole new tube, and the cost was higher. So your question was, how do you build the business case? Every senior leader signed up and said, you know what? We are the oral care leaders. We have to go first. We recognize and we understand the impact, but we've made a commitment to get ourselves back to cost neutral over the next couple of years. So, we said, this is how we're going to approach it. We're going to invest the capital. We're going to get the cost back down. And we're going to tell a lot of stories about this because it's the right thing to do. And on top of that, we shared the technology. So we've shared the technology with about 40 companies now, one of them a direct competitor, because we want all tubes to scale quickly and move to this new recyclable technology. If the infrastructure out there can't sort, our tube from our competitors' tube. So we need everybody in the same tube in order to get it recycled, right? So those are the steps we're taking. And we understood, I think, inherently the value of leading the way in this space. So that's an example where we said we have to do this. We didn't have, a rigorous financial model that said, this is what it's going to do. We did calculate the impact, and we said we're going to get back to neutral. And we have found ourselves asking our questions of ourselves, what if we didn't go first? And you don't want to become one of those companies that missed the trends, if you will. And I'm not going to name names, but you guys know who they are. So that's I think the best example. And there's going to be more examples like that coming, I think.
Wonderful. I guess from a customer, I didn't know this specific thing. I do know typically it's very difficult to recycle the toothpaste tube, but I did not know of the switch. So how do you go about, it's wonderful that you're sharing it with your competitors to build up kind of this critical mass and get the tipping point from the recycling perspective. And I had a bunch of questions on how you engage those stakeholders, but you answered them already. So that was wonderful. But how do you kind of engage the customers?
That's tricky, because we can get in a lot of trouble if we say this is recyclable. It is recyclable, but we have to get the critical mass there. So it's a lot of communication. We are messaging the best way we can, using the right legal language to help people become aware that we've moved to a recyclable tube and we're trying to work with others to scale it quickly. So, we can put the labeling that's legally acceptable on the tube. But, at the same time, it's critically important that we're working with the infrastructure. So with the material recycling facilities, with the, kind of APRs around the world. So in Europe, every country we roll it out in, we have to go to their local authorities and convince them it's, this is recyclable, and it is, and that, we want to start using it in the recycling stream. So it's a lot of work. It's half the job. The technology was half the job. This is the other half of the job. So we're really focusing right now on the infrastructure most heavily, and not as much on the consumer end yet.
Okay, we'll come back to the consumer end after a break. We don't have commercial breaks here, so let's take a 2-minute break and get to know you a little bit better. Got some questions. We'll kind of just go through them, and
Okay.
maybe for some of them there's some right or wrong answers. But what's your favorite spice or condiment?
Oh, my favorite spice. I guess I would just say cinnamon. I love cinnamon. I use cinnamon a lot. And that just came off the top of my head, so it must be cinnamon.
And what was the lowest grade you got in college?
That's a funny story. So, because I'll tell you a quick little story. We have a bookcase in our living room, and my oldest son pulled, I don't know how it made it there, but, and this is a very old book. I think it was Complex Variables, but the book's called Advanced Mathematics. He pulled it off the shelf. I don't know how it got there. We move a lot, so who knows where it got taken out of what box. And he pulled it out, and it actually had one of those, and now I'm going to date myself, those blue, little blue books. What do you call them? Where you
the
write
sticky stuff on the top of
yeah.
the book?
No, you write essays. You guys
okay.
probably all do it digital now. With Lehigh University, I went to Lehigh on it, and it had a test inside, and well, 2 of them, and one of them I got a 74, and the other one I got a 54. So I didn't do well in complex variables, and that was out of 100. So I'm not sure if it was the lowest or not, but it wasn't a good score. And this was just last week that he found it. So
our lucky time then. If you could think of your phone, what is one app you cannot live from your phone, or you use all the time?
I use LinkedIn a lot.
Perfect.
That's actually how I met you.
That is correct. That is how we got together. And our last thing, what is one interesting fact that people normally don't know about you?
That I was married 3 times to the same man. That's probably my funny fact.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And it's always great to know that our guests have our great personal side in addition to being wonderful at their jobs. I want to kind of go back and ask you, you talked about the customer and how important the customer is in sustainability. The toothpaste example was wonderful, but we'll use maybe a different element of toothpaste that I know you and I have talked about before, but it's what how much water people use when they're brushing their teeth. Right. So if you think about the 2 minutes, what am I using during that 2 minutes? Do you measure that? Do you think of that as you're thinking of the impact that Colgate Palmolive has on sustainability overall, water usage? And then, how do you drive customers to change their behaviors? And this is, nothing to do with recycling or the back end on the stakeholders. It's just an action I would do at home that not a lot of people think about. So
there's a lot packed into that question. So the first thing I want to share is that for our products that Colgate Palmolive sells in the world, the environmental footprint is like this. 10% of our environmental footprint, or our carbon footprint, carbon and water footprint, so I'll just call it environmental, comes from the material supply, both packaging and raw materials, to our factories, convert the materials into a product and send it to the warehouse. 10% of the impact. The other 90% comes when people take our products home and use them. So that's the biggest environmental footprint. So that's important to understand. And we need to, and for those of you who follow science-based targets, that 90% falls into the scope 3 aspect that companies are trying to influence now in their future science-based targets. And that's really, when it's out of our own control, out of our own 4 walls, that's harder, especially when it comes to consumers. So I'll get to the water example in a minute, but one of the big areas we're trying to understand right now that we're studying and we're trying to do quite a bit of research on is we call it the consumer intention action gap. So nowadays, a lot of consumers are very interested in sustainability. They're very interested in doing the right thing for the planet or the climate or whatever. And, you know, there's some extensive research out there by insights groups that say 90% of the people, when posed with the question, would you buy a more sustainable product, or would you, do something different or change your behavior to be more sustainable? 90% say yes. But when it comes to actually doing something different, only 16% of the people do something different. So that's what we call the intention action gap. So understanding what will help consumers to actually act on that intent is, I like to say, the company that figures that out is going to be the company that wins. But the saving water example is a great one and somehow we figured that one out because we've done extensive surveying around this. So about 5 years ago, 5-6 years ago, we embarked on an effort to raise awareness around water scarcity. Water use is very important to Colgate because if you think about it, every one of our products also requires water for use. It's brushing your teeth, washing your hands, washing your clothes. So we need water for people to enjoy our products. And there is quite a big water scarcity issue out there in the world. It's not as kind of well-known or prevalent as climate and plastic, but 2 billion people around the world don't have access to clean sanitation, and nearly 800 million to just clean water at all in different parts of the world. So it's a big issue. And if we don't do anything different, by 2050, half the population won't have, and it's all tied into climate and everything else. So we said, we sell 9 billion cartons and tubes of toothpaste a year. We embarked upon an effort to raise awareness around water scarcity. And we said, turn off the tap when you brush your teeth. So we kind of did some extrapolation and surveys and measures. And if you're supposed to brush your teeth for 2 minutes, if you turn off the tap during those 2 minutes, you'll save either 4 gallons or 15 liters of water. And so what we did was we've actually done a lot of rich surveying in the markets where we've targeted that messaging to see if we've had an impact, if we've changed people's behaviors. And we've estimated that we have actually, over the past several years since we started this effort, saved 155 billion gallons of water. And we've also translated that to 8.3 million 8.3 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions. So people don't think about it, but when you turn on your tap, it requires energy, and that energy can be translated to greenhouse gas emissions. So that's how, and I think the beauty of that program, which we call #Save Water or Turn Off the Tap, is that it was so simple. It was not hard. And back to the consumer intention action gap, it was a behavior that really wasn't hard. Just people didn't know. And when you told them, they're like, oh, wow, that wastes a lot of water. And so making people aware, it wasn't that hard to turn off the tap while you brush your teeth. So if you can help people understand what to do and how to do it, and if it's simple, they'll do it. So we continue to promote that program around the world. If you have a Colgate toothpaste at home, when you buy it's on the carton. There's messaging on the carton. You'll see messaging that says, don't forget to turn off the tap when you brush your teeth.
So that, I mean, it's wonderful. I really like how you've quantified that. You've tried to get this number, this 155 billion gallons of water. And I assume that's cumulative kind of since the project has started. So one way we can start advancing sustainability is we measure it. We say, we did this on water, we did this on energy, and it's wonderful you had that associated with that project. How do we know if we're doing a good job? I mean, did you aim for this 155? Was 160 billion gallons the target on any dimension? Now we can kind of apply this in general.
No, I think that's a really great question. And I think, if we go back to sort of some of what I said in the beginning, companies need to lean into what is most material for their business, what makes the most sense. So, for instance, Tesla is not going to probably talk to people about turning off the tap. It doesn't make sense for Tesla to talk to people about turning off the tap. But for us, that's important. And so, yes, I think we set metrics in our new 2025 strategy. We deliberately said, okay, we have these 11 big actions, and underneath we have actually up to about 50 targets that are very measurable. And, they're hard. We call them targets. We don't call them commitments because, if we knew we could do them, we probably didn't set them tough enough, right? So we have set targets going forward, particularly around some of the consumers, a lot with our suppliers. The consumers are tougher. That's probably the toughest space because a lot of that we don't understand yet. So I think what you're getting at is, yes, we've put targets in place. In some cases, like a good example maybe is to become net zero carbon by 2040. I mean, that's a bit of a ways out. And we said we're going to set that target without having all the answers of how we're going to get there. And right now we're busy building the roadmap to get there. So there's a little bit of set the target and then figure out how to get there versus, we have some idea that, and we believe this is doable. It's a bit of a healthy tension there.
This is kind of a perfect segue to another question. We're talking about business sustainability, and we use corporate social responsibility, the triple bottom line, some element to measure, how you're achieving, like you said, you gave us these 50 sub-targets that you have. But a lot of it is around scope 3, where we're usually thinking of just maybe our suppliers or suppliers, but it's also the customers, right? And we don't really in society have this idea of the personal social responsibility, or, how do we measure whether I turn off the tap or I use energy more efficiently, or I have a less impact on CO2 emissions compared to my neighbor or somebody else? What do you think are some things companies can do to kind of really help educate or inform consumers on this overarching problem that they're missing?
It's a great question. And I think, for us, let's talk about maybe 3 of the big spaces. There's plastic, there's water, as we talked about, and then there's even carbon. And I think a lot of it is about the messaging and the education and the storytelling and dimensionalizing it and making it easy for consumers to change their behavior, but through the product or whatever. One of the spaces that a lot of companies are looking into now that we're working together on is to set standards to put carbon footprints on products, so people know what the carbon footprint is to make that product and use that product. We call that the full life cycle analysis of a product. So that's a part of the education process. But I think that, one of the challenges we have, and I was just talking about this to someone the other day, is the plastic issue is a bit easy, isn't the right word, but a bit, you can tackle that because with consumers and talk to them about it because it's so visible. The challenge with climate change and the carbon aspect is you can't see carbon, you can't see it, right? I do think, as sad and as horrific as this whole COVID event has been, if we can capitalize on some of the clear evidence-based examples that we've seen over the past year, when all of a sudden about a year ago, people stopped flying, stopped driving, stopped everything. And what, lo and behold, now India, I can't remember if it was Mumbai, or can now see the Himalayas for the first time in 50 years, right? And there was dolphins in the canals, which I never knew they had dolphins in canals in Venice, but all these examples of, blue sky, literally blue sky examples. Guess what? That is evidence of reducing the amount of carbon you're using. That's clear evidence. I think, I guess that's the key word here, is sort of evidence. Data and evidence, breaks ties. So some of this is harder to get at and to convince people. So I think, it's continued messaging, education, storytelling, and as often as we can present examples like that, that will help.
And I just want to follow up on this eco label, like a life cycle assessment, where you help maybe customers understand the CO2 impact. Would this involve, customer practices as part of that? So you say, it's this much impact if you don't close the tap, if it's this much impact if you close the tap, or is it just your 10% that you're looking at really?
It's a great question. And I think for me personally, it's a little too early to answer that question. We're just now exploring and just to help the audience understand what we're doing is there's a number of companies who've come together and formed, I guess you could say, a consortium under the leadership of WBCSD, working together to understand what these standards should look like. So to your point, what does it include or not include? Does it include, what the consumer does? And quite transparently, my team, who's the team meeting on a regular basis, might be able to start to answer your question. I'm not close enough to it yet because they've just started that work. But, I think the key here is to set the standards. So if Colgate Palmolive puts an environmental footprint or a carbon footprint on a product, the way we're measuring it is the same way, my peers are measuring it, because if we all use a different standard, what's the point? It means nothing to the consumer if, they can't compare. Then it has to be standardized and harmonized.
Perfect. Switching gears a little bit, if you were going to give advice to somebody, so this is a two-part question. So somebody who's trying to get into the field of sustainability, what advice would you give them? So maybe somebody fresh or early on in their career that wants to get into sustainability, what advice would you give them? And maybe somebody who's been out in industry for some time, how can they get into the field of sustainability?
So yeah, I get this question quite a bit. There's roles like mine, and like I think I mentioned earlier, I don't have a big team, but I have, hopefully you heard me kind of tell the story of how I reach a lot of people across Colgate in different roles and functions. And then we have this kind of, we do have what we call a collaborative, where we bring over 200 people together quarterly to talk about what we're doing, give them updates. So they may not be, in my team, but they might be an engineer, they might be in marketing, they might be in corporate communications, but their focus is on sustainability. So if you can combine, a functional expertise or capability with an interest in sustainability, if you have what I will tell you is, if you have the passion, you'll get there, because companies are looking for people with passion to help drive kind of the agenda through, and we're really right now trying to embed it across the company. So you can have ways to apply that passion in any functional role that you're in. And that applies both for younger in career, getting started, and if you find that this is an area you're passionate about later in career, you can apply it in your role somehow. So you don't have to be, in sustainability to apply the practices and principles.
Great answer. And this kind of, this is my last question, kind of segues onto that, is you folks at Colgate Palmolive, you know, you see the value of sustainability, you understand there's a business case for it. Maybe if not immediately, you have a plan to kind of recoup that investment long-term. But what advice would you give to somebody who's in a company that doesn't see the value of sustainability or doesn't understand the impact that they have? What is something that they can do to start kind of the journey at their company so they can start to embed sustainability in their strategy overall or their practices?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's small opportunities and big opportunities. I think if you start with some quick wins, it's hard for me to imagine that any company today doesn't at some level recognize that even if it's in a small way, that they need to kind of start to shift the needle a little bit. I think the way we did it at Colgate, and a lot of companies do this, is start with how it will help with the business, the clear wins, and that often is in the supply chain, because a lot of the projects we do in the supply chain save money. It's not all about on cost, or, you know, so there's a lot of value, clear, tangible money saving values to reduce energy, to reduce water usage in the plants. So start there, get the wins there first, you know, maybe on the environmental side, and then expand from there.
Wonderful. That's all I had. I want to thank you very much for taking a lot of your precious time out and speaking to us. We really appreciate it. We appreciate all the insight. At the end, is there anything else you want to leave us with, or any parting thoughts you have?
Oh, I'm sure there is. You're asking me to be profound, and I'm not feeling very profound right now. But no, but I just hope that if people have passion in this space, that they really pursue it and look for ways to apply sustainability in their day jobs and even at home. It's so important, because it doesn't feel like you're making a big difference, but everybody collectively can. And I guess that's the one other thing. Just bear in mind that no one company can do it alone. So there's a lot of partnerships that have to be built to make all this happen.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for your time again, Ann, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.